our 4-year-old daughter, Harriet, attends a child's garden school just here on campus. And every day, almost every day this semester, Harriet has come home with a piece of paper that she's colored on at school, and normal children probably color like a landscape or like a dog or something. But almost every day, Harriet has come home and she's taken the time to color a treasure map, a different treasure map every day. She would bring it home and give it to me. At first couple times, I thought it was cute, and then eventually I thought it was a little odd, and so I asked her. I said, "Harriet, why are you coloring a treasure map?" And each day it would have like things that had happened in our life. So if we had gone out to dinner, it had like California Pizza Kitchen on the treasure map. And if we had talked to somebody the day before, it had like the person we had talked to. So I said, "Harriet, why are you coloring a treasure map every day?" And she said, "Dad, if I don't know the treasure map, how will I ever find where to go and find the treasure?" And I thought, that actually makes a lot of sense. I mean, I'm 37 years old, and I wish I had a treasure map. Like, in the complexities and challenges and blessings of my life, I wish I could wake up in the morning and have a piece of paper that had people and places and things going on in my life, and a little road that winded through and landed to treasure. Because if I had that, I would have all the answers I would need. Which naturally brings me to our gospel lesson this morning. Bear with me. This morning we're on the second Sunday after Christmas. To be clear, we hear in our gospel lesson from Matthew, we hear this lesson of the wise men arriving to the Christ child, the reading that we would hear on the Epiphany, but the Epiphany is not actually until tomorrow. This is the second Sunday after Christmas. So here's the interesting thing for me. If you've been coming to church these past months, any church that follows the lectionary we follow, you would have heard and seen and read that on the Sundays at the end of the season after Pentecost, as we anticipate Advent, the readings, particularly the Old Testament readings, become apocalyptic, right? And that proceeds into Advent. We hear these readings of war and famine and plagues and earthquakes, all this turmoil in the world, and then in the lectionary, Christ is born, the lectionary changes. And yet, if I were to hold up the newspaper this morning, it would be far more apocalyptic in nature than Christ-centered. And just to name a few, shootings and attacks on synagogues and areas of worship, fires in Australia, terrible fires, more than 200 blazing at this moment, many of which are in areas that don't normally anticipate fires this season. Now, living in Southern California, I realize how scary that indication can be. A country divided, unable to talk about issues or seemingly come together about anything. And then war. Like literally the danger of war. My last congregation was in Fayetteville, North Carolina, immediately adjacent to the largest military installation in the world, as far as people, Fort Bragg, home to the 82nd Airborne. Quite proudly. The 82nd Airborne prides themselves that within 18 hours, and people in my congregation would tell me this with pride, within 18 hours they have a go bag and they are ready to go anywhere in the world if the president asks them to go. And sure enough, there are people I know and love that are in Iraq after being told in 18 hours over Christmas break that they needed to be deployed. Earthquakes, wars, fires, polarization. Christ is born. Merry Christmas. So, and our gospel lesson for me tells me what I need to hear this morning. This lesson is probably familiar to many of you if you've grown up in a Christian church in the tradition that follows this reading. You probably know about the wise man. I know that every Christmas pageant I've ever seen has wise men in it, as well as angels and shepherds and donkeys. You know, every once in a while there's like a lobster. That's my preference when there's added characters. There's always the wise man, right? The wise men, or wise ones, are only mentioned in Matthew. They're not actually mentioned in any of the other Gospels. And in fact, in Matthew never tells us how many wise people there were. The Greek word for what that's translated as wise man is just wise ones, and it just says that it's plural. The tradition says that there were three because of the gold, frankincense, and myrrh they brought. The three gifts they brought, the tradition interpreted that to mean there were three of them. But we don't know how many there were. And in fact, the gold, frankincense, and myrrh are symbolic because those are anticipating the death of Jesus one day. But the point is, for me in this story, in a divided world back then, in a world of war back then, in a world of polarization back then, fires, earthquakes, plagues back then, God did a new thing. God shone light in darkness unexpectedly, and we have two types of characters in this story this morning. We have the wise ones, and we have Herod. So the wise ones from the east hear this story that God has done a new thing, light has shone in darkness, and they go and they follow. They pick up what they have, they travel to a place they don't know, and they find and discern what God is doing and what that means for them and for the world. And then we have Herod. Herod, don't be mistaken, it's easy to always look at Herod as the mischievous bad guy in this story. You know, he's always the sinister bad guy that we know Herod is doing the bad things. And not looking at Herod and realizing when we act like Herod. So Herod, he probably wakes up in the morning. He probably thinks he's a good guy. He probably thinks he's doing what God intends for him and the values he's been taught. And in his position and in his values, he hears and learns that God is doing a new thing, and he reacts in the same way that I react. When I hear news I don't want to hear, when I hear movement that I don't want done, when I hear that God is doing something that I don't want to happen, he delegates. He delegates it to somebody else to go visit what God is doing, and then when he hears more of it, he delegates other people to stop it. Instead of giving time, giving space, giving an acknowledgement that maybe the path for him and for the world is not the one he had known beforehand or he had planned ahead of time. And in doing so, he loses out on the miracle of the incarnation. He loses out on the gift that we receive as people on Christmas. Light in darkness. I'm reminded this morning of an email I received at a hard time in my life from a close friend of mine he's a priest. I worked with him in New Hampshire. Now he's actually a somewhat of a monastic in New Mexico. And he writes and he publishes. And he wrote me this email about the etymology of the word disaster, where that word come from and what it means for us as people who follow Jesus as it relates to the gift of the Epiphany. So bear with me. He writes, Epiphany reminds us that the word disaster was coined by the church in the Renaissance from the words dis, meaning without, and astron, meaning star. Disaster. Dis, astron. Because without a guiding star to Jesus, we are in disastron, the darkness referred to in John's prologue. The stars guide wise men and ships, hikers and surveyors, explorers and pilgrims. The star lights the way home. The star reminds us that no matter what seems to be immediately around us, we have a way to get to the Prince of Peace. The star reminds us that no matter what seems to be immediately around us, we have a way to get to the Prince of Peace. It is a small light and just enough to stave off disastron. It's like the cosmos' nightlight. Disaster is when the star is covered by cloud, storm, fog. The fog inspires the perception that we are lost. The art of life is not to stay on the road. The art of life is to wait for the star and follow it. Lead where it will and cost what it may. The art of life is not to stay on the road. The art of life is to wait for the star and follow it. Lead where it will and cost what it may. Herod, in this reading, immediately, with very little information, decides to stay on the road. Decides not to wait for the star or to follow it. Decides it's not worth where the star will lead. The wise ones, on the other hand, decide to take that risk and to go towards light, towards hope, in a world of darkness, of polarity, and of fear. So going back to that treasure map that my daughter likes to draw, that I wish I had an adult version of, because then I would know how to spend my time and what to value. The thing about a treasure map is it's pretty self-centered, right? It's pretty solipsistic. It's I'm headed towards a prize for myself, right? I think you all know this, but God does not have a treasure map for you. You know this, right? There's not a treasure map, a path for you towards a treasure. And if you came to church for that, I'm very sorry I don't have that for you. It's not going to happen. And in that beautiful, intangible relationship between our Creator and us, and that beautiful interplay as we co-create what will be beyond today, God has plans for us. God has maps for us. God has windows He opens, doors He swings wide to give us opportunities to lean into that light that provides the path before us. But we have to decide not to stay on the road and to follow the light, not the darkness. There will always be darkness. We need to be people of the light because the light shines in the darkness. So I don't know how you entered this place on this day. I don't know if you came from a place in your life that is filled with light and hope and joy. If so, that's fantastic. Good for you. But wherever you are, God is shining a light in your life. Where in your life is God doing a new thing that you might be scared to see and appreciate? Where in this community might God be shining a new light that we're scared to see and appreciate? Where in this world might there be a new light that we need to get off the road to see and appreciate and hope for? May we be a people of the Epiphany. May we be an epiphanal people. That's not a word, but I can pretend like it is. An epiphanal people looking for light and hope and joy in a world filled with plagues and famine and darkness. Amen.